Howdy everyone, I'm Honey, and happy Pride Month.
Future Honey popping in here to say that yes, I know it's not June, but it was when I started recording for this video. With that out of the way, please enjoy this slightly late video.
To celebrate this momentous occasion, and to piggyback off of the current popularity of the Fallout TV show, today we're going to cover our gay icon, our queen, Lee Moldaver. This video will be discussing major plot points that take place in the Fallout TV series, and we'll also be covering some content from Fallout 3, New Vegas, and 4. Now, I'm gonna give a hot take. The Fallout TV series is a prime example of what video game adaptations should be. I'm sure you've never heard that one before. The story skillfully integrates new characters into Fallout's previously established world and perfectly translates the addictive gameplay into a cinematic experience that echoes the numerous ways one can play through the show's three main characters: Lucy, Maximus, and the Ghoul. And beyond that, the writing is incredibly charming. One-off comments and jokes cunningly mutate into an arsenal of Chekhov's guns as the episodes progress. Oh, you got all your fingers. Sure hope nothing happens to them. And everything is neatly wrapped up by the end of the season too, fleshing out the backstories and character arcs of even secondary characters with the speed and cunning of Malcolm Holmes hearing somebody pick up a rare bottle cap from across the Sierra Nevada. I mean, truly any side character you could possibly get attached to has their 15 minutes of fame, all with their stories neatly wrapped up in a satisfying and well-written way. Okay, fine. Not every thread has been wrapped up in a satisfying little bow just yet. And I would argue some very important questions haven't been addressed at that. One of the biggest questions I had while watching the Fallout TV series was something I was very surprised not to see answered. How is Moldaver still alive? I mean, she's been fighting against Vault-Tec since before the Great War. She must be at least 250 years old by now, and she doesn't look a day over 30. Honey, drop the skincare routine because clearly it's working. But seriously, how did Moldaver survive 2 separate nuclear disasters and 200 years of time this untouched? Fortunately for you, dear viewer, I know of quite a few ways in which characters throughout the Fallout series have been able to brush shoulders with immortality. And I am unreasonably confident that I know the real reason Moldaver is still alive. So, without further ado, welcome to Immortality in Fallout, as it vaguely pertains to Moldaver. First thing on the agenda is to look at what we already know after watching the first season. In Lucy's flashback from her childhood in the cornfields of Shady Sands, we can see that Moldaver is noticeably younger than she will be in the year 2297, which is when the majority of Lucy's story takes place. We can infer that Lucy was roughly 6 years old at the time of this memory, and therefore we can estimate around 20 years or less has passed since. Moldaver's appearance doesn't seem to have changed between Lucy's first memory of her and Moldaver's meeting with Cooper Howard around the year 2077, so we know she only began aging again within the last 20 years. Now, the only life-extending technology that we've seen in the TV series so far that matches this description are the Cryo Pods of Vault 31, like how Hank McClane and the rest of Vault-Tec's junior executives continue to thrive thanks to the Buds program. If she spent the first 200 years of the post-war cryogenically frozen, then it would make sense that she only began to age after she re-entered the wasteland. But if Vault-Tec was at all aware of Moldaver's stance against their own company, they certainly wouldn't have let her into any of their vaults, let alone one with the capacity to extend her lifespan, right? I mean, according to Bud Askins, the purpose of the Vault initiative was to outlive the competition. We know that Vault-Tec bought out the companies Moldaver worked under to attain the rights to cold fusion, which she invented, so Vault-Tec was definitely aware of Moldaver's work. The question is, was Vault-Tec aware that she was an anti-Vault-Tec activist? If they weren't privy to her political beliefs, there could be a chance she's shacked up in a vault, but at this point, even more questions start to surface. What are the odds she ended up in a safe vault, let alone one which could extend her lifespan in the way she has? Of the 122 vaults placed before the war, only 17 were labeled control vaults, which were vaults that lacked some sort of experiment, and only 2 so far as we know actually used cryogenic chambers in any capacity. So, how about we look at these 2 vaults? Vault 31 was stationed nearby in California. It was populated entirely by Vault-Tec junior executives, which already reasonably rules out Moldaver. Vault 111 was built over 3,000 miles from California, all the way in Boston, and had 2 known survivors by the year 2287. Its entire staff and even its overseer dying out before the plot of the Fallout TV show even takes place. It's also important to note that while Moldaver may have had the money to purchase a place in the vaults, just like Barb Howard said, no amount of money in the world would get you into one of the good ones. Overall, I think the chance that Moldaver survived by working alongside Vault-Tec to be quite slim. So what are other viable ways Moldaver could have used to extend her lifespan? The Secret of the Cabot House. In Fallout 4, there is a questline in which the sole survivor aids the Cabot family. a wealthy and well-connected pre-war high society family which has somehow continued to live in the post-war wasteland in relative luxury. In the questline, The Secret of the Cabot House, the sole survivor is tasked with preventing a group of raiders from releasing an archaeologist by the name of Lorenzo Cabot. Along this questline, the player learns that the Cabot family has imprisoned Lorenzo for over 400 years, using him to extract a mysterious serum from his blood, which has kept the entire Cabot family alive for centuries. This mysterious serum is the source by which the Cabot house has maintained their health and, more importantly, youth. If you've been paying attention, you may have realized that 400 years is quite a long time. In fact, it's far longer than the wasteland has existed at this point. This means that the Cabot family unlocked the secret to immortality even before the bombs had dropped, and, with the right information, so too could Moldaver have caught wind of an immortality serum even before the bombs had dropped. Even more interesting is that this serum requires consistent use, meaning that Moldaver's sudden aging in the last 2 decades could be explained by losing access to the serum. On the surface, this seems like a perfect solution, a serum that can perfectly extend someone's lifespan in just the way we've seen. However, like I said earlier, this serum requires the body of Lorenzo Cabot, and from what I understand, there's a reason the Cabot house is located so close by to Lorenzo's prison. It isn't viable to live off of this serum through stockpiling alone, so they need to stay close by to frequently produce more of it. Not only that, but I think it's quite unlikely that anybody outside of the family knew anything about this serum, let alone Moldaver from across America. But how is Lorenzo Cabot still alive after over 400 years in the first place? And could Lee Moldaver have followed in his footsteps to achieve immortality without the mysterious serum? Well, Lorenzo first acquired his supernatural abilities in the year 1894 after uncovering an artifact in the Rub al-Khali desert in the Middle East. After exhuming an ancient crown from the buried lost city of Ubar and affixing it to his head, Lorenzo was plagued by voices and visions of the ancient city. He gained greater strength and telekinesis, and his aging halted entirely, even seemingly reversing to a degree. At some point, the artifact could no longer be removed from Lorenzo without killing him, and his mind and identity began to deteriorate as he grew increasingly paranoid and violent with fits of psychotic rage. With the artifact being bound to Lorenzo's body, and considering his newfound psychic abilities, it seemed extremely unlikely that Moldaver could gain access to it. It also would prevent the events of the Fallout 4 quest from occurring in the way it did. And even if somehow the artifact didn't render Moldaver completely insane, we would have seen her wearing the crown at some point, considering that it could not be removed from a living host. Unfortunately, though a very interesting method of immortality, I would consider it impossible that Moldaver had acquired the Cabot family mysterious serum, nor Lorenzo's artifact. These were heavily guarded secrets both before and after the war, and even still, they were simply located much too far away. It just wouldn't make any sense from a storytelling perspective to see Moldaver travel to Boston while Season 2 is already spending time trying to introduce the audience to New Vegas. The mysterious serum is an incredibly unnecessary and complex means, and I do not think it's the answer to Moldaver's previous immortality. Ghouls. Speaking of unnecessarily complex, what if Moldaver is a ghoul? We know that ghouls have extended lifespans, but we also know that they show signs of ghoulification within hours to a few months of exposure to the proper radiation. If Moldaver had turned into a ghoul during the bomb drops in 2077, there wouldn't be any way that she'd look like she does now. But ghoul lore is inconsistent, and ghoul lore in the Fallout TV series is even more inconsistent. Think about it. Isn't it strange that our lesbian queen Moldaver Slay the Boots Down had such a close relationship with Lucy's mother, but when the bombs dropped, only Moldaver survived? Perhaps she already had some sort of innate resistance to radiation. Obviously, it's possible that Moldaver was just on some sort of mission away from Shady Sands when the bombs dropped, or she found her way into some sort of bunker, but this wouldn't be the first time she survived nuclear devastation. To get a better understanding of ghouls in the Fallout TV series and their inconsistency, let's look at our favorite desperado, the Ghoul, and how he compares to our ghoul in training, Thaddeus. The Ghoul is a much more prototypical example of a Fallout ghoul, sporting melted flesh and an overall ghoulish appearance. Sure, he's a bit stronger than your average ghoul, but plot armor isn't a thing to be reckoned with, and he doesn't show any signs of excessive regenerative abilities like Thaddeus. Cooper Howard was presumably ghoulified when the bombs dropped on California, as we see in the show's opening scenes. This is vaguely important because ghouls actually first occurred before the first bombs dropped. Desmond Lockhart and Eddie Winter are both cases of pre-war ghouls intentionally extending their lifespan via radiation experiments, meaning that we know it's possible to become a ghoul intentionally. And therefore, it's possible Moldaver was aware of such experiments as well. Thaddeus' ghoulification, on the other hand, differs from both of these methods, but there is still one place where a ghoulifying drug has previously shown up. In Fallout 4, the lone survivor meets a possible companion known as Hancock. What's interesting about Hancock is that he became a ghoul more than a century after the bombs had already dropped. Hancock took a rare one-of-a-kind radiation drug that was said to produce the most powerful high imaginable. although we don't really see any reason to believe Thaddeus is incredibly high after consuming the snake oil salesman's elixir, and Hancock admitted that this dose was the last of its kind. Assuming Hancock knows what he's talking about, this drug can't be the one that Thaddeus consumed. Another thing to consider is that Thaddeus doesn't look like the ghoul. Now, this isn't entirely strange, because ghoulification can take hours to months to fully take place. It's not at all a stretch to say that Thaddeus is simply in the fledgling stages of ghoulification and is only experiencing the positives for the time being. But let's talk about those positives, shall we? The snake oil salesman explains that Thaddeus will no longer have to worry about radiation. This makes sense because ghouls are immune to the effects of radiation. But what is not a symptom of ghoulification is superhuman regeneration. In fact, ghouls appear to consistently deteriorate over time. Increased durability, sure, but enhanced regeneration is a no. Rad regeneration is a quest perk seen in Fallout 3, and the ghoulish perk from Fallout 4 and 76 work very similarly. But these perks have so far been reserved for the human player of the franchise. While this could be a sort of explanation, the problem is that regenerating from radiation or any other means is not related to being a ghoul specifically. Even in the show itself, when we see the ghoul lose his finger, it doesn't grow back, and the skin doesn't magically heal over like we'd expect from someone like Thaddeus. We even see Roger the ghoul has a permanent gash exposing his skull in episode 4. So if Thaddeus isn't a ghoul, could Moldaver also be something similar? There has been a lot of speculation that Thaddeus is in fact a mutant, and that the elixir he consumed was some sort of FEV strain. FEV, or Forced Evolutionary Virus, was a mutagenic virus developed by defense contractor Westtech to create soldiers and better evolved people who could survive the wasteland. The logic is that Thaddeus is not the first FEV mutant to be incorrectly identified as a ghoul. The Forced Evolutionary Virus. Harold is a unique FEV mutant from Fallout 1 who at one point identified as a ghoul. Later, in Fallout 3, his mutations diverged and he was classified as a mutant. Initially, his appearance was that of a zombified human, no different than any other ghoul. But over the course of 116 years, he slowly transformed into a massive tree ant of sorts, as a small sapling had mutated and rooted into his skull. If you thought ghouls were inconsistent, then FEV mutants are the definition of inconsistency. The location of where the FEV was administered, the strain of FEV, and the host itself all greatly impact the outcome of an FEV mutant. We're talking Master, giant fire ants, Slay the House Down Lily Bowen, centaurs, and many, many, many more. The variety and the ways that FEV can affect a host give much more room for us to speculate on a possible answer to Moldaver's condition. For all the things FEV doesn't do consistently, it has one thing that it does very consistently. It extends the lifespan of those who survive it. From what we know, it's unlikely that the Forced Evolutionary Virus would leave Moldaver so unscarred as she appears in the show. So, are there even any cases where FEV has produced a stronger human without mutating their appearance? The Organic Synth Project. Welcome to the Institute. Love him or hate him, you probably hate him. You see, the Forced Evolutionary Virus wasn't only used to mutate pre-existing humans. The Organic Synth Project was created by the Institute, an underground high-tech society. This project was spun off from the FEV Research Initiative after the acquisition of Sean, the son of the lone survivor. Sean was cryogenically frozen in Vault 111 when the bombs initially dropped on Boston, and his undamaged pre-war genetic code was recovered in the year 2227. His DNA became the basis of the third generation of synths in a project led by Dr. Walter, creating organic synthesized humans with greatly extended capabilities, strength, and lifespan. Synths were originally introduced in Fallout 3. Harkness and Armitage were the first two third-generation synths that Fallout players ever encountered. Originally, synths were entirely mechanical androids developed for the purposes of free labor. But after researching into uses of the FEV strain and the acquisition of Sean's DNA, far more human organic synths were invented for even more complex and covert operations. The Institute, being disgusted by the surface wastelanders, used these third-generation synths to enact attacks upon the surface. Coupled with factions like the Brotherhood's distaste towards mechanical life in the year 2287, there began a mass panic in the Commonwealth, as residents of the wasteland feared that synths would infiltrate their homes without detection. Many synths, in fact, cannot detect themselves, being implanted with human memories, and they can be created at any age, making them capable of very quickly replacing a human as soon as they are released onto the surface. So, if synths can carry the memories and physical appearance of a person, could Moldaver be a synth with the memories of the original Moldaver? Perhaps she was recreated in the year 2277 when the Institute first began the Organic Synth Project. This would place her in the world 19 years before Lucy's main story takes place, aligning with the timeline of Lucy's first memory of her in the cornfields of Shady Sands. Now, although the timeline links up very well, the Institute would have no reason to create a synth soldier with the memories of a 200-year-old deceased activist who is staunchly opposed to hoarding technology like the Institute has. In fact, Moldaver's entire goal of providing power for the wasteland is something that the Institute of 2277 would never do because the Institute wanted to wipe out the surface dwellers. Not only this, but synths cannot age and remain in the same state that they were first created, so Moldaver could not be a synth. But what about a less advanced form of cloning? Gary. Fans of Fallout 3, or honestly just Fallout in general, are well aware that cloning exists within the franchise already, so there's really no need for Moldaver to be a synth when she could easily be a perfect genetic clone of herself. Vault 108 is one of the most popular vaults that I'm aware of, sporting the slightly scary and very hostile Gary clones. Now, interestingly, the purpose of Vault 108 was not primarily to experiment with genetic cloning, but rather to test the reaction of vault dwellers in a time of crisis when experiencing a power vacuum. As a completely supplemental branch of research, the scientists of Vault 108 began creating clones of a vault dweller by the name of Gary. With each successive clone, the subsequent Gary would become more and more hostile towards non-clones until they banded together to take over the vault entirely. The Garys are seen repeating their first name over and over again like Pokemon, only utilizing inflection and tone to communicate. But they can be overheard communicating to one another with more complex dialogue if the player is hiding. What Vault 108 seems to reveal is that cloning leads to deteriorated cognitive function, which does not suggest Moldaver would be a clone. However, we also know that the initial clones behaved much more normally than their successors, and that Vault 108 was able to facilitate the creation of clones as a side project. Cloning humans is not a particularly difficult science in Fallout, and the initial Garys prove that in some cases cloning is viable. It's unclear if Gary clones maintain the memories of the Prime Gary, but they do show significant similarity to their peers. We know Moldaver has knowledge of before the war when Lucy confronts her at the Capitol, so if Moldaver was a clone, she would need some way to get this information. Maybe clones do inherit knowledge, or maybe this Moldaver discovered this information on her own. We also know that memories can be directly programmed into organic brains because we see it done with Gen 3 synths. I do think it's entirely possible that Moldaver is simply a clone. However, I also think there is one final explanation that is far more likely than any of our previous theories. The Cryo Suites. Circling back to a more meta-analysis, the fact that we don't learn where Moldaver gets her immortality from in the first season suggests that we will learn more about this story arc in the second season. In turn, this implies that it will require more explanation than there was time for or than fit the flow of the first season. Because of this, I don't think it's likely that Moldaver's survival was reliant on something directly addressed within the first season. I do, however, think that whatever Moldaver used to extend her lifespan will build upon what we have already learned. While there has been an excessive focus on Vault-Tech's use of cryogenic technology, Vault 31 is not the only place we see cryotech within the show. In the credits of the finale, the first thing we see is a large billboard which displays the Tops Hotel and Casino Cryo Suites, book yours now, as we pan through the New Vegas Strip. In every previous episode, we see the credit shot pan through a location that alludes to the following episodes. In the episode before the battle at the Griffith Observatory, the camera pans through the front gates of the observatory and shows a crashed vertibird which we see gunned down in the next episode. In the episode before Thaddeus travels to the broadcasting station, we see the camera pan past the station's sign and across the traps placed in the station's front yard. We have to imagine that the final shot from the Season 1 finale will function in the same way. Now, we know that the next season's first episode will focus on the Tops Casino's Cryo Suites. We also now know of another method of extending one's life that's based upon what we already learned in the first season, the Cryo Suite. It's not very difficult to see how this would apply to Moldaver's unfinished history. I believe that the real way Moldaver survived 200 years after the bombs dropped was by acquiring a pod outside of Vault-Tech's jurisdiction. Now, assuming all of this is true, what does this mean for Fallout moving forward? I predict the Season 2's flashbacks will focus on Moldaver's experiences after being released upon the Wasteland, following a similar structure to Cooper Howard's scenes in Season 1. We'll see Moldaver stepping out of the Cryo Pods in the Tops Casino in the year 2277, and the story will build upon Moldaver's connection with the NCR, explaining how she came to live in the new California Republic capital, Shady Sands, why she raised an NCR flag at the Griffith Observatory, and her association with the dwellers of Vault 4 who worshipped her as the Flame Mother. This would mostly take place in New Vegas, which would also help to ground the story in one location and allow the show to focus all of its effort on establishing the New Vegas of 2296. How does this impact what we already know about Fallout New Vegas? Well, we know that there are multiple powerful factions in Las Vegas before and after the bombs dropped, such as the scientists at the Big Mountain and the New California Republic, to name a few. The fate of these factions, however, is very dependent on the choices of the Courier in 2281, and therefore we have multiple canon histories that need to be isolated for Season 2. Seeing as the NCR is so important in Season 1, it is possible that Season 2 will focus on an ending which allows the NCR control of the Mojave. This is of course not set in stone. After all, we also see the young Mr. House in the Vault-Tech meeting in Season 1, who is arguably a much more powerful entity in the New Vegas Strip. But Vault-Tech was not considered an active player during Fallout New Vegas. Regardless of what faction was able to grasp control over the Mojave in the year 2281, the winner must have faced their own challenges. It's not difficult to imagine that Vault-Tec could have theoretically entered the playing field in an opportune moment, overthrowing the ruling faction, and creating a sort of nexus point that any canon event would lead to. This may allow for a more ambiguous political situation in New Vegas without committing to one canon ending, the sort of deus ex machina that Bethesda might need to keep up their sleeve to avoid angering fans. Bethesda is in a precarious situation, trying to solidify the Fallout lore in a way that has not been previously necessary, but I think they've handled the situation with some level of grace. They have very cleverly pointed all major character storylines to New Vegas, Lucy following the Ghoul and turning against her father, the Ghoul tracking Hank McClane to New Vegas to confront someone within Vault-Tec to find his family, Maximus searching for Lucy in New Vegas, and even Moldaver's past leading back to the Tops Casino. They have a perfect opportunity to establish a grounded and satisfying lore for New Vegas in the year 2296, and we can only wait to see if they deliver. The answers to Moldaver's backstory are likely to be, in fact, the answers to the fate of the Mojave Wasteland. Howdy! Since the video is wrapping up, I wanted to give a super special thanks to you, the viewer, for watching this whole video. If you liked it, more than anything, I'd just love to hear what you have to say in the comments. It really encourages me to make more videos. And if you're interested in helping more directly, check out my Patreon. I'd love to be able to make YouTube my job someday, and I'm going to be posting some exclusive content there. You can also see my YouTube videos at least one day in advance. What do you think I should cover next, and how do you think Moldaver survived the war? Thank you for stopping by, it really means the world.